What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the one and only NIO stock and what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be a massive day for the markets as CPI is coming out. Let's talk about what the expectations are. Are we going to meet expectations? Is the market about to crash? Is the market about to pump? I'm going to break down what the odds are, what I do expect to happen, and everything you need to know. Now, before I break anything down, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire NIO community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, whether it's $1 or $100, it's really up to you. You're guaranteed 12 free stocks, each worth up to $2,000. And the best part is any could be a free NIO share. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 2 weeks. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. NIO is down 1.15% for the day. Got a pretty decent bounce, but NIO is still looking fine. Completely fine. It's not necessarily dead or anything like that. It to me personally is just channeling back and forth between this demand zone, which is very close to this $12 range, 12 to like 12 point excuse me, sorry guys, 12 to about 12.15 around there. That's like where the demand zone is, and then supply zones all the way up around 13.5 to about 13.4. And NIO is just going back and forth and back and forth. If I go back just a little bit more, you could see quite clearly we're at 12. We push up to the 13.5. We actually touched 14 once. Come back down, back up, back down. And you're probably thinking, okay, maybe we're going to start pushing up. And it looks very likely from a technical standpoint, especially because NIO has these gaps that formed. I did mention yesterday that I expected NIO to sell off today a bit, but I do believe that where NIO goes in the future is still very capricious because it's going to depend heavily on data that comes out. And that's why I wanted to shift your focus on the data part. What data is coming out? When is CPI coming out? How could this affect NIO and the markets? CPI is coming out tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, an hour before the market opens. Remember, this is heavily dictated by housing and energy costs, so please be very cautious. So let's actually look at some interesting things. We have some good things and bad things to talk about, and this is why I'm so uncertain about what this report is actually going to be. It's very tricky to read. I do believe it's going to be close to expectations, and it could be either way, either like a little below expectations or above it. It's important to really watch for this. So let's actually talk about this. What's good about the data? The good thing about the data is when you look at gas prices, all right, gas prices on average for retail in the USA for October, the average price was about $3.94 a gallon. For November, they were about $3.80. We have about a 13-ish cent drop in gas prices. That could be pretty decent for the report. However, we also had a couple of days ago PPI come out, and this was actually higher than expected. Both core and the overall PPI were actually a little bit higher than expected, so that's not a good sign either. And I say that because we could actually do an analysis of PPI and CPI and also talk about their correlation. So the expectation for CPI is 7.3%. Are we going to get there? Are we going to be above or below? I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then core CPI, which is CPI without food and energy, the expectation is 6.1%. So a very significant drop. And notice that this thing has been on a bit of a downtrend. Notice how this was kind of high for the month of October. And then for November, and actually it was a little bit lower, so we're hoping for a continuation of it to come down and truly respect a downtrend. Now, what does the data suggest? If I go here, I basically did an analysis between the collective PPI and CPI data. And what typically happens is CPI tends to come out first and then PPI tends to follow it. But this month, PPI came out first. So I don't believe that one is the determiner of another, but they do tend to have some correlations. And that's why I want to discuss this and talk about what we could be expecting based off this. So the first thing to remember is in January 2022, PPI was lower by 0.1%. CPI was as expected. So this is relative to expectations. See how similar they are? This was almost identical, the reports compared to expectations, except PPI was just lower by 0.1%, which is like super low. It's a very close estimate. Then they were the same in February in terms of meeting expectations. Both of them were higher than expected. They were as expected in the same for March. Same result in April. In May, June was a little bit different. PPI was a little bit lower, but CPI was a little bit higher. So you could see they were pretty close, but quite similar. July, they're the same. Uh, for August, they have the same result. For September, they're a little bit different. I mean, PPI was lower by 0.1%, CPI was higher by 0.2%, so they tend to be pretty close. October, PPI was higher, so was CPI. For November, PPI was lower, so was CPI. You guys could quite clearly see that about 80+% of the time, if PPI is higher than expected, CPI will likely be higher than expected too for the same month. And if it's the other way around, right? The same thing tends to happen. If PPI is lower, CPI tends to be lower. There were some exceptions, such as the month of September and the month of June. I just wanted to note that. So it's not always going to be perfect, but typically PPI and CPI tend to have lots of a big connection, right? So what happened for the month of November, this was the December report that just came out last Friday. PPI was higher by 0.2% year over year. This is the overall number. Now, CPI comes out tomorrow. The real question is, will this be higher or lower? The data suggests that the average difference is 0.23%, and CPI will likely be 0 to 0.4% higher than expected. But in my opinion, I would lean more towards maybe the lower end because of gas prices. So my prediction is maybe around very close to expectations, honestly. I wouldn't be surprised if it's about 0%, meaning it's the same as expectations, to maybe like a little bit higher. That's very, very possible. So somewhere around here, I think is the most likely thing we'd see. And if that's the case, this would show us a CPI report of about, wait, that's core. CPI would be about 7.3 to 7.5%, which is actually showing signs of decline. That could be a pretty decent sign for the markets. Maybe the markets pump off that, increasing the odds of a 50 basis point rate hike from the Fed. Maybe that's more likely, and I do believe that that's what my prediction is going to be. So 0 to 0.2% higher than expectations, or it could be just at expectations. I'm not predicting it's going to be much lower because of excuse me, because of what PPI showed us. So I do believe that this is more likely to cause the market to either hold its levels and maybe push up just a little bit. I don't think it's going to be that violent though, in my opinion. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is core, because remember, CPI itself, that includes gas, energy, and food. But the markets also look at core CPI, which is without food and energy. And this actually tends to be pretty different from PPI. So I don't really consider this a good thing to predict, but we could actually give it a try. So notice how they were different in terms of their differences from expectations. So if they're both green, this just means that, wait, this was actually, hold on. This should be red. Sorry about that, guys. Anyways, both of them were essentially higher in January. Both of them were higher in February in terms of core. We could see right here, things were a little bit different for March. For April, they were a little different. For May, they were kind of different. June was different, then July was the same. August was very close. September was essentially the same. October was a little different, and then November was essentially the same. And then looking at this historically, they tend to be similar about 60% of the time. So that's why core CPI and core PPI are not like the best ways to be compared. The average difference is about 0.35% to 0.4%. So core CPI will most likely be between 0 to 0.6% higher than expected. I actually think that we could round this up a little bit. So it's either going to be like negative 0.1% to about 0.6%, right, above the expectations. So we're either going to get a lower PPI or something that's a little bit on the higher end. And then looking at the data, the higher end looks much less likely. So I would predict something like 0.1 to about 0.3% above expectations. But that seems very unlikely. I would go for the lower end, so like 0.2, something like that, right? So that's what I'm essentially predicting. This could also help the market pump. I think this is the most likely outcome. And once again, this means that we're most likely going to be a little lower than expectations or very close to it. This is what this data suggests when I did the analysis. So that's going to be very, very good for the markets. All right. And I do believe that that increases the odds of the market maybe pumping a bit, especially NIO going for the gap fill and seeing at least the 12s, maybe touching 13 tomorrow. Very, very likely. But at the same time, we also have to be prepared for anything. The market's already pumping based off this. So maybe institutions already know and we are set to retest the upper trend line again. This is by trend line, I'm talking about the channel that the SPY was in for quite a while. So it looks kind of like this. Let me just draw this out. This looks like a rising wedge, right? This rising wedge right here that SPY was respecting. What could happen is we may retest the lower trend line as resistance around 406 to 408. That's also very possible if the Fed helps us pump even more before getting another rejection, then slowly coming down as the weeks go by. Because remember, there are lots of red flags on the VIX and other indicators. The market will still eventually come down. Now, if we break out of the broadening descending wedge resistance, if SPY breaks like 410 again, it is possible for there to be a fake out rally to like almost 417 or so. That's the next resistance to watch. That would really trick a lot of people. Is it possible? Sure. But even if that happens, I'm not going to turn to the mega bull, guys, because I know the market's going to most likely come down soon. I'm very confident about that for the start of next year. We're only a couple of weeks away. That's why I'm still very cautious in this market. But specifically, instead of just talking about the longer term, I want to just talk about tomorrow. I'm expecting SPY to make a relatively decent move. I don't think it's going to be very flat. I think we just formed an inverse head and shoulders like formation. We pushed up. The market looks like it may want to continue depending on the data. If the data is good, and I mentioned to everyone, it's most likely going to be very close to expectations based off previous trends, based off PPI, and based off the gas prices. This suggests that we're most likely going to see this thing continue to pop, maybe hit 400. But if it happens to be worse than expected, both core CPI and CPI in itself, just hypothetically, this thing could also come crashing down, all the way back down. That's why I'm personally holding both calls and puts right now. I'm not actually like uh, leaning just in one side because I do expect a big move. I'm also using money I'm willing to lose, so please know the risks. I believe we're going to make a big move. It's a little bit more likely to push up now, but anything could still happen. All right. That's why you have to be prepared and you have to watch for the number that comes out tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. If the market pumps tomorrow because of the data, NIO has the potential to go for the gap fill and continue pushing to the upside. If and I'm saying this, hold on, I'm saying this because we actually bounced off the demand zone. If things are not good and the market crashes tomorrow because of the CPI report, which is less likely in my opinion, it's still possible, but it's less likely. If the market tanks, NIO could retest 12. If it breaks below that, this thing's going to crash to about 11.66. All right. So I'm just warning everyone. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think NIO is more likely to start pushing up. We just bounced off support, the demand zone. We have these gaps up here, and NIO has been in this channel for the past few weeks. It looks like it's going to continue to stay here. So I do believe that that's what we're about to see. Sorry about that. My chart is just all over the place sometimes. So see how it's just going back and forth and back and forth. I do believe that that's what's set to happen. And you will also notice that NIO is at the bottom of this channel. So hoping for a nice bounce tomorrow, a nice push up. And I do believe CPI is more likely to cause that. Anything could happen. Like I said, be prepared for anything, but upside seems a little bit more likely now that the data came out, and that's what it's suggesting. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Please be ready for tomorrow. It's a huge day for the markets. It will affect the Fed's decision during the FOMC meeting, and I'll see you guys in the next one. NIO to the moon because the long-term future is still incredibly bright, and peace out.